as we were discussing last time about, whom to imitate, whom not to imitate, and also reproducible and non-reproducible strategy, you talked about in your book about the time horizon. Okay, and you say the longer the time horizon, the better and more reliable your available options to achieve your goals. I was just trying to understand this and try to see how I can juxtapose, with the biotech industry, for example. Okay. Now, actually, if as you might be aware, biotech is in failure business. Meaning most of the drugs fail at, let's say one point of time in phase one, phase two, phase three. Hence, they don't have a, like 20 years lifespan, or let's say, 10 years lifespan. Of course, those who survive, they do. And that is also subject to many factors. One big factor is that their product is successful, and then vision of the CEO and so on, who would like to take the company to the next level, forward integrated to become a pharmaceutical company. So my question, I was just thinking was that how does this time horizon, does it also depend on industry, or it is agnostic to any industry? And how can, let's say, people adapt this long horizon approach, especially when dealing with industry that has a failure, that's in failure business actually?
Yeah, so let me begin by introducing this idea of the longer time horizon giving you better options. In the book, I make the thought experiment that a mafia boss comes to you and says that you need to give him $1 million or he will kill you. And he gives you the deadline tomorrow. Now, you only have bad options to find that $1 million. I don't know, like you sell your house and you go to the casino and you bet everything on the 36, or you sell your kidneys and whatnot. Terrible options. Now, imagine that the mafia boss tells you that you have 5 years to come up with the $1 million. Now, the things are a bit better. You have some options which are more reliable and less risky. For example, you might work super hard on a career that can actually give you that $1 million. You can make some bets which, yes, are risky, but not as risky as betting everything on a single roulette game and things like this. Now, imagine that a mafia boss gives you 30 years to come up with $1 million. Now you have very good options. You have reliable ways to come up with $1 million. Like there are some careers that if you pick them and you stick with them for 30 years, you are almost guaranteed to come up with $1 million. Especially if you move to certain countries, certain towns, and so on. And not only that, but you can also get to the $1 million in a way that is actually enjoyable, building some relationships, taking the time to enjoy your work, and so on. So this is what I mean by the idea that by having a longer time horizon, you have better options, you make your success more likely, and you make it more enjoyable to reach, and the journey will require less sacrifices and will enable you to build better relationships, to do your job in a way that you enjoy and you are proud of, and so on. Now, what is the time horizon? Well, that depends on the industry, it depends on you, it depends on a lot of things. But I think that the lesson is to do not arbitrarily restrict your time horizon by wanting to succeed as fast as possible. Because I know a lot of people that want to succeed as fast as possible because they think that it's better, but because they think, of course, if I can decide between succeeding now or succeeding later, I want to succeed now. But they neglect that to succeed now, you need to do things which make succeeding risky, which makes it unreliable, which makes it unlikely, and also that make it unpleasant. Maybe you have to do things which are unethical. Maybe it means that because you want to succeed as fast as possible, you see each relationship as transactional, and therefore you do not enjoy, not only you do not enjoy it, but also you do not build a relationship that lasts, which means that maybe you grow faster now, but then you will reach a level in which you plateau and you cannot
Exactly.
grow afterwards because you will not have built strong relationships and so on. So I don't know, for example, what's the right time horizon for biotech or for you, but the thing is, if you think that you would be satisfied by achieving success in 10 years, for example, then I encourage you to think, how can I use those 10 years well? And what does it look like to make it as likely as possible that within 10 years I succeed, instead of relying on strategies that give you a better chance of succeeding within 1 year, but a worse chance of succeeding over 10 years. For example, strategies in which you're making risky bets, strategies in which you forget about building relationship within your industry, strategies in which you see relationship within your industries are things to use rather than things to build, as things to consume rather than things to build, and so on.
Got it. Thank you. So I think it brings me to another point about, when we talk about time horizons, we also talk about compounding. And one point you very well also talked about, and I think you took a quote from Morgan Housel as well, that if your investment returns are 50th percentile every year, you will end up in the top 5 to 10% over a 20-year period. And you also wrote, while it won't be easier, the upside you get from staying in the game will grow. That's a very brilliant point. But I would like to connect this point with ergodicity, actually, where I think also you mentioned about that different countries, are, like if you take about US and Europe, right? Or even let's say countries that are not developed, many people who are poor may remain poor forever. So the reason is, so my question is to you is that when you talk about, while it won't be easier, the upside you get from staying in the game will grow. Are there any exceptions to this rule? Is this something related to the ergodic or non-ergodic world?
No, yes. So it's definitely related to ergodicity in this, because the point is to achieve some kind of success reliably, you need to have a relatively long time horizon. Depending on what we're talking about, it might be 5 years, it might be 20 years, and so on. But there are a lot of types of success that you can only achieve reliably over a long time horizon. And that I would arguably say that it applies to most kind of successes. There are very few kind of successes that you can achieve reliably over 1 or 2 years. Now, the point is, if you're going to have to be in the game for 5 or 20 years, you need to have a strategy that guarantees survival, or at the very least, almost guarantees survival over the time horizon of your choice. So a strategy that has negligible chances of failure over 20 years. In the book, one way in which I show this difference between time horizon, I make the example of lying. If you lie, and let's say that you are a very good liar and you have a 1% chance of getting discovered, then lying looks like a great strategy to get out of difficult situations or to sell and so on, because you have a 99% chance of success. However, if you lie once a year, if you lie once a week, you have a 99.5 chances of getting caught and having your reputation destroyed over 5 years. So it means that if you're pursuing a kind of success that you can only achieve reliably over 5 years, you cannot afford to lie. Lying cannot be your strategy because it will lead to fast growth, but then failure, before you can achieve success.
Mhm.
But it's very tricky because during the first few months, those who lie get ahead, even during the first few years. And therefore, we feel like we are falling behind. We feel like we look left, we look right, we look at our peers or competitors that get ahead by lying, and we think that it's a good strategy. We think that it's a better strategy. And so we are tempted to switch to the strategy. But we need to remind ourselves that it's just because that's a good strategy over the short term, but a bad one over the long term.
Got it. And in one of the chapters also, you talk about what matters is not the expected value of a bet, but its distribution of outcomes. And you give the example of lottery as well. But my question is that, of course, lottery is kind of an extreme example, and we understand the probabilities. But if we define risk and uncertainty, right, where in risk we know probability, in uncertainties it's hard to calculate probabilities. And then in the real world, when we make decisions, many a times it's all uncertainty, right? So in that particular case, how can we, let's say, talk about distribution of outcomes? Because to understand the distribution of outcomes, we also might be having some sort of sense of probabilities, right?
Yeah, so since you talked about the lottery, let's begin with that example. We all know that we shouldn't play lottery because the lottery works, the odds are bad. It's something along the lines of, let's say that a ticket costs $1 and the lottery organizer has a jackpot of 1 million but sells 1 billion tickets, and so the expected value of each ticket is negative. But imagine that you had a lottery with positive expected value. So imagine a lottery where they sell 1 billion tickets for $1 each, but the prize is 100 billion. So in theory, each ticket is worth $100. Sounds like a great investment. However, if you bet if you sell your house and you go buy 200 million tickets, you only have a chance of becoming extra rich, and you have an extremely high chance of becoming homeless. So this is an example of the difference between expected value and distribution of outcomes. You can have bets and strategies which have a positive expected value, yet a bad distribution of outcomes. And of course, on a societal level, on a group level, you do not care about the distribution of outcomes, you care about the expected value. But you are only one person, and for you, what matters is the distribution of outcomes, not the expected value. I always make the example of this dude who works for a startup, and more brilliant startup has a chance of being super valuable, and the guy on paper, like he has a lot of stock options which are extremely valuable, and most of his wealth is in this stock option. And common advice would be you should diversify. But the guy thinks, diversify with what? Because any other investment I can buy has a lower expected value than the stock options in my stock. And maybe he's correct. His startup really is extremely valuable. And let's say that the startup has a 50% chance of becoming the next Google. What his expected value is billions of dollars, or at least hundreds of millions. But what is his distribution of outcomes? His distribution of outcomes is a 50% chance of becoming a billionaire and 50% chance of ending up with almost nothing. Conversely, if he takes, I don't know, 30% of his stock options and he finds a way to sell them and buy a very, very prudent portfolio, then his distribution of outcome is 100% chances of being a multimillionaire. And
Right.
even if the expected value, the expected wealth is lower, his chances of being happy and satisfied are higher. And one of the arguments I bring forward in the book is that we overvalue the expected value and we undervalue the distribution of outcomes. And that we should first maximize the distribution of outcomes, and only in the measure that our distribution of outcomes is about something like 99% chances of being happy, then we can think about increasing the expected value of our strategies and bets.
I think that's the exact reason why venture capitals, for example, even in the biotech industry, right, they don't care about any expected value, because most of the time, as you know, 95% of the assets fail, right? So the idea is that you could either be zero value, because your asset could fail immediately, or you could be a very high value. It's a kind of a power law distribution, right? So that perfectly fits into that. Next, I think you also talked about learning from failures, right? Where how we can kind of de-risk. My question to you is that in the practical world, now it's true that we always try to kind of get some lessons from who are successful, and that's why even in the books, you'll see catchy lines like how to make, let's say, $1 billion, or how can you be millionaire, or how you can, all positive things. My point is that in the real world, how can we really learn from the failures of other people? Because the problem, what I have seen is that those who fail, because of the cultural or in which culture they are set in, like for example, if I compare Europe and US, of course it's completely okay to fail in US, right? You're not looked down upon, actually. Whereas here, of course things are changing, but nevertheless, would you like to work with a failed person? I remember there was one professor, he asked in one of the business schools I studied. So the point is that the person is not willing to share that particular story. In fact, I can tell you one interesting story about a biotech CEO who recently failed. But he, the failure is, okay, one, you can fail because your asset doesn't work, which is very normal in a biotech. But he failed because of some strategies he didn't work very well. So I thought that it might be very nice for him to kind of interview him and so that he can share. But he was not that eager to share that. So that said, do you see that it's very, very tough to kind of learn from failures from others in the real world?
Well, the thing is that you can actually, I agree that it's difficult to learn second hand, because the person would be unlikely to talk about it, or if they talk about it, maybe they will hide under the rug the exact reason why they failed, and they will come up with something more socially acceptable or whatever. However, you can learn it from the third hand, from the third person point of view. Just 2 nights ago, for example, I went to have dinner with my wife at a seafood restaurant in my town, and we talked with the owner. It wasn't a busy night, so the owner was talking a little bit with us, and we casually talked about a couple of other restaurants that failed and how they failed. So I truly believe that if you ask someone successful who's been or even someone not necessarily successful, but someone who's been in a business for a long time, they will know about a lot of failure stories. And especially if you ask them privately, like with no expectation of making it public, you will probably get a lot of good examples of things that people underlooked and then caused their demise.
Right. So, for example, I also know many people in the restaurant business, and I know that the failure rate is very high in that. So that connects to the point of your argument about base rate failures, right? So, so the idea, if I understand, is that, okay, if I have to start a restaurant in business, for example, and if I see that there is 80% chance of the failure, so do you think that, I should incorporate that particular point into my decision making? And if yes, in that, what part of decision making I should incorporate? What I mean by that is, I could argue that, okay, these, I could be in the 20%, not in that particular 80%, because they might have failed because of some other reason. Because as you understand that human, we focus our decision making mostly on many times irrationally, right? Not very rationally. So can you comment on this point?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact numbers for the restaurant businesses, but I am sure that it's something along the lines of maybe like the base rate across everyone whoever opens the restaurant is, let's say, 80%. But if you isolate for people who open the restaurant after having worked at least, I don't know, 3 years for another food and beverage business, then the failure rate goes down to, I don't know, 30% and something like this. And on the one hand, I'm sure that you could like isolate the real failure rate for people that are similar to yours with a similar experience and so on. But I think that, truth be told, it's not as effective as useful as an exercise, as instead just trying to figure out how people with the same goal as yours failed, especially people as smart as you failed. Like, I'm sure that there is a percentage of people who failed because they are dumber than you or less hardworking than you and so on. But there are also so many people who failed despite being as hardworking as us, as smart as us, and as experienced as us. And I think that it's extremely, extremely valuable to spend some time figuring out why those people failed and how you can avoid the same mistake. Because otherwise there will be a high risk that all your hard work will go to waste because you fail in the same way that other hardworking people fail.
Got it. So, Luca, as you know, we can of course keep discussing this, for very, very long. So I wanted to kind of uh, get into like, a couple of last questions, so that we are on time. A very interesting question that we also discussed earlier with you as well is that, and even if you talk about the base rate failures, right? Let's say, for example, if you think about smoking, we know that smoking causes cancer, lung cancer, for example. It increases the chances of heart problems and all that. Nevertheless, people don't think about the long-term view because they enjoy that short-term success, as you say, right? So in your opinion, why many people, in fact, not just about the cigarette smoking, in terms of the relationships, you talked about, I know many people who are very much transaction based, they will contact you when they need something from you, but when they do not need you, they will never say hi, and it's okay, I mean, it's very difficult to change that perspective. But the question is that why do people are not that long-term focused, and is it like uh, these things are very naturally ingrained in us, or this can be learned, to be long-term looking? Because at the end of the day, decision making also relates to uh, ego, our own ego, trying to understand that whether I have the capacity to learn new things, or I would like to, do. Because I think somewhere I read that, when we want to make decisions, first we decide and then we try to justify our decision with, these kind of examples.
Yeah, so first I will give you the superficial answer, which is that people who smoke cigarettes, like a lot of the people who smoke cigarettes or who have transactional relationships, they have a shorter time horizon. and they act in a way that makes sense over the short-term horizon, but doesn't make sense over the longer-term horizon. But I think that this is a superficial answer because it doesn't go to the point of why do they do that? And the reason, in my opinion, why they do that is because they have the belief that if they get the most out of each day, they will also get the most out of the year. But that is false, because to get the most out of the year, you will have a few days to take actions that bring absolutely no return today, but are necessary to grow beyond a certain point over the course of the year. And people who try to get the most out of the year, they never build those fundamentals that are necessary to grow beyond a certain point, or they never avoid those risks which are negligible on a day-by-day basis, but are not negligible over the lifetime. And I think that this is the main false belief that then drives the behavior. This idea that if you get the most out of every day, you will also get the most out of the year.
Got it. So what are the couple of important points that, and this would be my last question, that what are the important points that we can learn so that it allows us to win long-term games?
Well, the first thing I would do is to think, how will you do things differently if you gave yourself more time to achieve your objectives, but then not using the extra time in a lazy way, let's say, still active and working on your objective and so on. And then you ask yourself if this second strategy will not only make your success more likely, but also will make it more enjoyable. And I think that this is one thing. And then the other thing is simply like becoming good at spotting survivorship bias. Becoming good at noticing that whenever we see someone who looks like he's getting ahead, we ask ourselves, but is it sustainable? Is it scalable? Is he building what he needs to keep growing beyond the next few years? Is it something that, yes, he got lucky in this, but if I did the same thing, I am not guaranteed the same results? And I think that these are all very useful questions.
Great. So I am just drawing one graph because after reading your book, it also reminded me of one graph which I think Morgan Housel also has put in his book, Psychology of Money. So it's not exactly what the idea is the same, it's like this, So the point here is that in the long term, for example, what you should be doing is that you will have some short-term failures, right? So these short-term failures should not bring kind of an absorption barrier to be successful. But if you keep surviving, thinking, then, I think it's a chart of the, S&P 500, something that he showed, that if you like to survive that absorption barrier, for example, then that's the kind of way you could win. Is that the right way to summarize your book, or kind of one of the ways to summarize your book?
Well, it definitely doesn't summarize the book, but
yeah, exactly.
I think it summarizes one of the concepts, one of the many concepts within. I think that what I would add to this, because it's not just about definitely not about just ignoring the short term and making sure that you can stay over the long term, because it's very possible that you stay over the long term but go nowhere. Which is another failure mode that you can realize if you study the failures of others. You realize that there are some people who just coast along and just survive, but they do not build the skills, relationships, portfolio, and whatnot that is necessary to not just survive but also grow. So I think it's not only just about surviving, but also asking yourself whether you're making progress. But of course, progress towards what matters for the long term, not just to the short-term metric.
Exactly. So what my point was that, of course, it doesn't summarize whole of your book, but when, let's say, the way analogy I was just thinking out loud was that if I'm going down, right, for some reason, that means that, I try to bet on or try to have some strategy that didn't work, for example, then it's a kind of iteration, I learn from that particular mistakes and then try to apply, in that particular long term. So that way, I might have in the short term some success, some failures, but it is not impacting my long term success. That was the point I was trying to make here.
Yeah.
Super, Luca. Thank you very, very much. And I wish all the people who are listening, if you have a chance, you get this interesting book. And I wish you all the best in your future, and we stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Saurabh, for having had me.
Thank you.